Hello fellow pilgrims, I'm Doug, this is Camino 2020, and today I want to talk to you about walking sticks versus trekking poles. I am not typically a person who likes to have a lot of stuff in my hands when I'm hiking, but there have been times when I've been out in the woods where it's been nice to have a nice sturdy walking stick in my hand as I go along. Just kind of comforting to have it there. It's good for balance, if you need a lean break, and it can fight off wild animals. But when I started researching gear for the Camino, I discovered that a lot of people were using trekking poles. Now, trekking poles, if you've never seen them, are kind of like collapsible ski poles that people use to help them while they're hiking. And this has become something of a debate when it comes to the Camino. Do I want a walking stick? Do I want trekking poles? Or do I just want nothing in my hands while I'm on my walk? Having a stick or some poles are good for balance. They can be helpful if you need a little bit of aid with your balance, maybe going over some tricky terrain. Now, this brings up one of the difficulties in the decision, for me at least, which is just kind of the image of the Camino pilgrim, the classic, epic image that you might think of the pilgrim out there walking across Spain. What's that pilgrim got in their hand? Walking stick, right? The time-honored image, if you will, of the pilgrim is not somebody out there with a bunch of high-tech gear, ultralight backpack, and a couple of trekking poles. I think that if you're like me, I'd like to see myself as being one of these, Gandalf-looking wizard guys, and just really fit that image of the millennium-old classic pilgrim. But let's be realistic. There's a lot about the classic pilgrim that I do not want to emulate. I don't want to wear their clothes. The pilgrims back then, they just had on whatever they could get their hands on, probably the same thing they wore every day. I personally prefer the technical gear. I like the wicking. I like the lightweight. Another time-honored image of the pilgrim is the gourd. If pilgrims wanted to get from one place to another and have enough water, they didn't have Nalgene bottles, they had gourds that they would fill with water, but you don't really see anybody debating the merits of a Nalgene bottle versus a gourd. A Nalgene gourd. Huh? So really, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, there's really not a whole lot about the original pilgrim kit that the modern pilgrim is going to want to emulate. However, if the image of the walking stick is important to you, go for it. Walk your own walk, hike your own hike. One of the difficulties with the walking stick is that there really isn't anywhere to put it. Walking sticks are often heavy, and once you decide you don't want to carry it anymore, there's not really like a good way to stow it until you want it back again. Consider this. A typical Camino day is going to average about 25 kilometers. Now, from the step counters and things I've seen, that's about 35,000 steps. So, if you're doing just kind of the typical walk along with a walking stick and you're picking it up every other step or so, you're going to be lifting that stick 17,000 times a day. That adds up. And another concern I had about the walking stick may sound a little silly, but hey, this is me. I know that I personally would get very attached to a walking stick. If I carry something like that all the way across Spain, I am definitely going to want to be taking it home with me to put up on the wall, maybe hang my shell off it, and have that be kind of the emblem of my walk. In fact, while I was considering this, I talked to my dad, who carves these epic walking sticks for people. And he mentioned that maybe he could make me one for the Camino, and I got really excited about that. But then I got thinking about some of the possibilities of loss. With all the changing rules with the TSA, who's to say they would even let me bring the stick on the plane? Or they throw it in luggage and it gets broken or lost. I would be so upset if that happened, that if my dad did make me a special walking stick, I would probably spend my entire Camino terrified of it getting lost or forgotten in an albergue, in the haze of the early morning, stolen, or something along the way that eventually meant me not being able to bring it back. I just don't think I could deal with that. So you definitely have a cost-benefit analysis going with a walking stick, but you've also got one going with the trekking pole. Now, just practically speaking, compared to a walking stick, you're going to get most of the benefits. You've still got that just kind of comforting walking stick thing going on with the poles. They are also very helpful with balance over tricky terrain. And while they're not as good as a stick, I suppose you could use them to fight off wild beasts. Some other benefits in comparison with the walking stick is that these are very light. Picking these up 17,000 times a day is probably not going to be anywhere near as heavy as picking up a big stick. The other thing is that they collapse very small. This is the total length of these particular trekking poles prior to being extended. And when I want to put them away, I can collapse them, stick them in my pack. If you have the Osprey 38, you can use the special trek pole carrying system. In any case, there's just not a big commitment to carrying trekking poles because you can always just put them away when you're not using them, or if you just want to use one. Further, I think that if trekking poles are used correctly, they actually give some benefits that you don't get from walking sticks. Now, a lot of this has to do with technique. I know that when I first tried out trekking poles, I was essentially using them as if I just had two walking sticks in my hand. And so I would swing the pole forward, set it on the ground, kind of walk past it, pick it up, set it on the ground, kind of walk past it, except now I was doing it twice. And I was just kind of walking along. And I see a lot of people doing this on the trail. Now that's fine, but that's not really what the trekking pole was designed for. Rather than being a passive piece of gear that only really gets used in certain situations, trekking poles are meant to be very active. As you're going along on flat ground, they act as sort of third and fourth feet, an extra set of legs. You're actually engaging the pole with your muscles of your arms so that you're pushing yourself, kind of like a little outboard motor, and you're propelling yourself forward down the trail. If you're going up, this can also be very helpful because you're engaging more muscles in moving your body up. And as the poles go down and you push, you're actually taking weight off of your leg. And that can be very helpful for your knees and ankles. And that goes double for going downhill, where you can control your descent with the poles and take a lot of pressure off aching knees and ankles that you may have developed by that point. Another helpful thing for me is that I don't tend to get super attached emotionally to trekking poles. So if I lose a pole, break one, they get stolen, I'll pick up another pair, no big deal. I'm not going to be hanging these on my wall with my Camino shell when I get home. These are just tools to help me hike. Now, speaking of technique, it's important to note that trekking poles were designed with a very specific method in mind. Now, this doesn't mean you have to use them this way. In fact, I practically always switch things up as my comfort level changes with the poles. But you should at least know what they are designed for so that you can see if you really find them helpful. What I see a lot is people will start off with the strap, they'll see it hanging there, and they'll think, oh, it's a wrist strap. And they'll just stick their hand through the top and grab the pole. Now, that does kind of support you a little bit. And I suppose if you drop the pole, it wouldn't fall very far. But that's not really what they're for. And in fact, wearing it this way can be dangerous, because what it does is it forms a fulcrum right here that goes right over your thumb, such that if you fall and your hand opens up, look where the pole is. You're basically making a lever to break your thumb. So why is the strap there? Well, the idea actually is that you go up from the bottom, such that the straps kind of lock onto your wrist, and then that is where your weight goes. Your power is pushing into the straps and not the grip of the pole. And what that does is it keeps your fingers very loose. You basically just have to hold onto the pole tight enough that you're not dropping it or it's flopping around. But as you're hiking, your power is actually going down into the strap, which then converts it into the pole, and it keeps your hand from having to grip the pole really tight to keep it from sliding off as you walk. And that's the way the trekking pole is supposed to be worn. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to do it that way. When I'm going downhill, I like to transfer up to a palm grip so that I can kind of push the pole in front of me as I go down the hill. Also, if you're going uphill for a short distance and you don't really want to change the size of your pole to match it, you can also use the secondary grip, if you have one, and kind of choke up on the trekking pole to get you through the high points, and then switch back up to the regular grip when you get back on more level ground. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that the trekking poles are meant to be used in tandem while you walk naturally. In other words, the pole should go forward with the opposite foot, land at the same time, push off to the next foot, and as it comes down, the next pole comes down. So your poles are always opposite your feet as you're walking, and they're pushing behind you to propel you forward. Now, the first time I tried this, I really overthought the whole process, and it felt super awkward trying to get the poles synced up with the feet, and I didn't know what I was doing. But it's actually quite natural. If you think about the way you walk, if you just let your arms swing, you have a twist in your torso that keeps you in balance. And that's what keeps you from flopping from side to side as you're walking. It's actually pretty hard to walk and keep your feet in sync with your hands. So if you just take your poles and just let your arms loose at your side, start walking, you'll see that you will just automatically start swinging your arms in the correct motion. And then it's just a matter of setting the pole down when you do. So you're swinging forward, back and forth, kind of the way an animal does, sort of loping along, and you're gaining that extra power by pushing behind you. So if you get the correct grip, up and then down, and you're swinging your arms correctly, pushing off behind you, not just swinging the pole forward and walking past it like you do with a walking stick, the trekking pole becomes a pretty serious aid in moving you forward. Okay, so let's say that you have decided to go with trekking poles for your Camino. Are there any other decisions you have to make? Of course there are. In our modern day, nothing can be simple, right? So I'm just going to go through the anatomy of the trekking pole and go through some of the major decisions you'll have to make when you go pick out your own pair. So let's start at the top with the grip. This is a cork grip. The other kind of grip that you will typically see is some kind of rubberized foam, which is what I actually have on my secondary grip, which I'll get to in a minute. I like cork because it absorbs moisture, okay? If your hands get wet, get sweaty, they're not going to slide around on this because the cork is just going to absorb it. My secondary grip that I can use when I need to choke up is the rubberized foam kind. And it's a little softer, it feels a little nicer on the hand, but it can wet out a little easier, and that can cause blisters. I have heard that this is a better grip for winter hiking, people that are wearing gloves, because it's a little more insulated and it may absorb shock a little bit better. I'm not going to be walking the Camino in winter, so I went with the cork grip, although I would definitely suggest picking up poles that have a secondary grip regardless of what it's made of. Because if you do decide to let go of the strap and choke up temporarily to get through some more rugged terrain, or you're going up a really steep hill and you don't want to stop and adjust the pole, nice to have. All right, next, the shaft of the trekking pole. Once again, you've got two major decisions. Are you going to go with aluminum or are you going to go with carbon? The benefit of the carbon poles is that they are very light. So if weight is your premium consideration, you pretty much just want to look at the carbon trekking poles. Now, carbon is more expensive, not amazingly, but you're going to probably have to spend about 20 to 30% more on a comparable trekking pole if you want carbon instead of aluminum. Now, these are aluminum. Originally, I got these just because they were cheaper, but I have since discovered that they are also stronger. I have heard of a lot of thru hikers breaking their carbon trekking poles, and given that they're more expensive, that is definitely not something I want to deal with. So part of your decision is going to be weight versus strength and price. The next important feature of a trekking pole are the bindings. Because trekking poles are adjustable, there has to be some way to lock them in place once they're where you want them lengthwise. And once again, you have basically two decisions. One is going to be the snap lock, like I have, that just is basically a quick release. You open it, adjust, snap it closed. These are adjustable so that you can make them tighter or looser when you snap them. This pole has two of them. The other kind you're going to see is a twist lock, where you'll actually grab the pole section itself, turn it a few times to loosen it, get it where you want it, and then twist it back. Now, cost benefit. The snap locks are faster, and I have heard that they are also a bit more trustworthy, so long as you have them dialed in correctly. So that's your decision there. I would just try them both out and see what you think. If you're someone that doesn't really make a lot of adjustments as you're going along, it probably doesn't matter a whole lot which one you have. Finally, we need to deal with the tip. Now, this is where a lot of accessories come in. Most trekking poles are going to come with some accessories that modify the tip of the pole. But without any of those accessories, what you're usually going to have is some kind of metal tip at the end. I believe this is tungsten. And the idea there is that as you're going along, instead of battering your actual pole into the ground, you've got something that can wear down over time, which also gives you a little bit more grip. Tungsten's very grippy. You know, you put this on granite and push, it's not just going to slide off. These will eventually wear down. No matter what they're made of, they're going to wear down. And so make sure that the tips can be screwed off and are replaceable, and get some replacements for your pole. The accessories that typically come along are something that covers the tip or something that goes around the bottom of the shaft. So for example, these little guys here are known as baskets. Some of them are made for mud or snow, but essentially they slide on and they turn the trekking pole into a sort of ski pole, so that if you're jamming it into snow or mud, it's not just going to slide down and trip you up. The other thing you're going to find are extra tips. Now, some of these can be very high tech. They look like little, miniature tire slices, but essentially what they do is they just go over the tip and they create a different surface for the pole. Now, one thing that I like about these is that, if nothing else, they are quiet. Now, when it comes to walking the Camino, I personally think this is very important, because you're not always going to be walking on nice, soft, loamy dirt. You're going to be in rocky areas, you're going to be on sidewalks, streets, cobblestones, and you're not going to be walking down the Camino clack, 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 clack every time you put your poles down. It's going to drive you crazy, it's definitely going to drive the people around you crazy, and it can actually mar the surfaces. So I think that having some of these in your pack is a good idea, even if you don't bring the baskets. When you're thinking about walking sticks, trekking poles, nothing at all, remember that ultimately it is up to you. It's your Camino. Walk your walk, hike your hike. If this video has been helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up, like down there, subscribe, click the bell so that you get updates in the future. And until then, buen Camino.